Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, taking the podium for Big Ten Media Day. And look, I ain't going to get up here and say that we can learn a ton about these programs from a 20-minute press conference. But when we have the opportunity to do a little reading between the lines, we certainly going to do that, especially as it pertains to this Oregon football team in 2025, where I don't know if there's many Oregon fans that know necessarily what to think about this football team. There's a lot of new faces. There's one thing you can't argue with. This team's capability, what they can be in 2025, they can be national champions. Now, that's how good we think this roster can be. We're going to learn a lot about this football team over the next couple of weeks, especially as we go into fall camp. Now, what did we learn over the last 2 hours as Dan Lanning and some of these players were doing some press conferences? That's what I want to get into. Before we do, and as always, to the Oregon fans, I do want to say thank you. It's been a long offseason. It's been an offseason that had some ups and downs, especially for Oregon on the recruiting trail. Many of y'all have been rocking with the boys for a very long time and throughout the summer months. And as we roll into fall camp, as we roll into 2025, can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Ain't many teams that are going to be more fun to talk about in fall camp than Oregon. You got position battles, and I'm talking about legitimate position battles pretty much up and down this roster. Without further ado, let's get into it. I want to start with a little bit of a bigger picture before I get into some smaller nitty-gritty takeaways. The idea that Dan Lanning gets up there and says, hey, we want to double down. That's the team's motto going into 2025. And I like it. And I get that it's coach speak. And I get that we hear a lot of that stuff in Big Ten Media Days. Look, when you have a performance like Oregon did, excuse me, against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl game, you get a tendency, especially from the outsiders, especially from the fan bases, to say, hey, blow it all up. What we're doing ain't working. We're this far away from Ohio State. I think what Dan Lanning is trying to emphasize and quite frankly recognize here is, look at where Oregon was when Dan Lanning took this program over and you played Georgia. And it just was like, hey, night and day. We ain't even close to competing for national championships. But now fast forward to where we were in 2024, where Oregon's going in 2025. It is very clear that the process that Dan Lanning is doing in Eugene, it's working. There ain't no question about it. In that motto of double down is, hey, we had an unfortunate result in that Rose Bowl game. Ain't no doubt about it. But hey, let's continue to do what we're doing because we're clearly going in the right direction. And kind of recognizing, look, Kirby Smart took him 5 years before he won his first national championship in year 6. Took Jim Harbaugh 8 years before he won his first national championship at Michigan in year 9. It took Ryan Day 6 years before he won his first national championship in year 7. It's very rare to see head coaches come in and immediately win national championships. There's a process that needs to take place before you get over the hump. And I would argue that Dan Lanning is making up ground faster than almost any other head coach in the country, maybe outside of Coach Sark and what they're doing down there in Texas. I like it. I think it's easy to say, hey, we got to change things up because it ain't working. It's clearly working. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer than you think. Number 2, and look, I'm all over this one. Many of y'all knew it. Kenyon Sadiq. Is this kid going to lead the team in receiving yards? There is, especially with the injury to Evan Stewart, even before the injury news of Evan Stewart, losing a guy like Tez Johnson, there were a lot of question marks about the Oregon wide receiver room. Now that Evan Stewart not healthy to start 2025, those questions are certainly amplified. All the buzz, a lot of us are talking about Decorian Moore, and rightfully so. I think he's going to be one of the best players on this Oregon roster. I think it is time to start asking the question of, is Kenyon Sadiq the best skilled player, the best pure pass catcher on this Oregon roster in 2025? I don't think that's all that crazy to say. Couple of reasons. Number one, you don't bring your worst players to Big Ten Media Day. And Kenyon Sadiq's only a year 3 guy. He gets invited by Dan Lanning to represent this program in Las Vegas at Big Ten Media Days. That tells you a little bit about where Kenyon Sadiq is. going into 2025. Then more notably, Dan Lanning gets up there and just sings Kenyon Sadiq's praises. It's a guy that runs 23 miles per hour, guy that jumps 41 inches in the vertical. I don't know if you'll find a more gifted tight end in the country than Kenny Sadiq going into 2025. And with all of these questions around, hey, what are the pass catchers going to be around the quarterback position in 2025? Your pass catcher number one. Ain't nobody want to include tight ends in the pass catcher room for Oregon. The tight ends has historically, played a really important part in this Oregon offense, and I think they got arguably the best one in the country in 2025. Go back and look at some of these offenses that have either won or competed for national championships. And Georgia with Brock Bowers, Michigan with Colston Loveland, Penn State with Tyler Warren. It is not all that rare to see national championship caliber offenses run their passing attack through tight ends if those tight ends are good enough. Now, the problem is these kind of tight ends don't grow on trees. Brock Bowers, Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, Kenyon Sadiq, they're not easy players to find. But when you have them, they can elevate your offense, elevate your passing attack much more than I think people like to appreciate. Kenyon Sadiq only had 27 targets last year, 25 catches. That was a 92% completion percentage when Kenyon Sadiq was targeted last year. He forced 10 missed tackles, had over 200 yards after the catch. This guy is a tight end. I don't say this very often because, again, there ain't that many tight ends out there that are capable of doing this. Kenyon Sadiq's a guy that you can run your passing attack through. You can ask him to line up in line. You can split him out wide. He's one of the fastest players on this football team. He can work vertically down the field, but he's also dynamite with the football in his hands. That's a big body that moves real fast. I don't think it's crazy to say Kenyon Sadiq might lead this team in targets, receiving yards in the 2025 year. I think it's going to be him and DeCorian Moore. And that's not to say that you don't have other wide receivers that we like a lot. It's one of the deeper wide receiver rooms that you see in the country. I would go as far to say, name me a program that has a deeper 12 than Oregon does. You got guys that can play, but we're trying to figure out, hey, who are we going to run our passing attack through like we did with the Tez Johnson, like we did with the Troy Franklin. I'm looking at Kenyon Sadiq and say, hey, I know DeCorian Moore is fun to talk about. We got to start talking more about Kenyon Sadiq. Number 3, another thing that we've talked about, and it was nice to hear Mateo say this. We think we're more talented on defense this year than we were last year. Now, on the surface, you'll have a lot of national media talking heads get up here and say, well, what do you mean? You lost a lot of guys from that roster in 2024. What do you mean you're more talented in 2025? Well, I think he's pretty spot on. This is a roster that has it has a lot of youth. It has a lot of inexperience, but look at this. Oregon went and grabbed 4 guys in the transfer portal on defense, and I'd only argue that 2 of them I think are going to play a ton in Bear Alexander and Dillon. Dan Lanning has shown us that if he finds and thinks he has problems on his roster, he gonna fix it in the portal, and he ain't gonna be shy about it. Dan Lanning did not go to the transfer portal and grab all these guys on the defensive side of the football. They have the capability to do so. We've seen them do it. They didn't do it this offseason. I think that tells you the confidence Dan Lanning has with some of this young talent on this roster. Dan Lanning talked about it. He's like, hey, one of the best parts about our program has been the retention. In this era where there's NIL, transfer portal, we're making additions, we're losing players, especially when you're as deep as Oregon has been, it's hard to keep really good football players on your roster. Really good football players that might not be able to play, that could play a lot of places elsewhere. Oregon did a really good job with the player retention part, something we've talked about over the last 18 months. Oregon doesn't lose players they don't want to lose. I think that's going to pay off in 2025. And you get a lot of guys that probably would have played elsewhere, decide to stay at Oregon. Well, you think they're going to be ready in the 2025 year. Again, are we reading between the lines a lot here? Probably. I think it's worth doing. All right, we'll close it out there. Next episode, we're probably going to do position battles for this Oregon team going into fall camp, of which they're all over the roster. That might be a 30-minute episode. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.